Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome to episode 18 of Survivor Strong, the podcast where we talk about all things related to childhood trauma. I'm Yvonne Sandomir. I don't have a guest this evening, so I hope it's okay that I started a few minutes early. I didn't think it would be the end of the world. I don't have a guest this evening, so I want to talk about a fascinating book that I discovered while doing some research in preparation for my next book. The book is called The Parent's Guide to Protecting Children from Pedophiles. The author is only known as MBC, so he is essentially anonymous. When I selected the book, I expected it to be from the perspective of an advocate or a therapist, but as I started reading, I knew right away this was something totally different. This book was written by a different kind of advocate, a perpetrator himself. Now, if you've listened to my first 2 or 3 episodes, you'll know that this is absolutely fascinating to me. I've always wondered, what makes perpetrators tick? Why do they do the things that they do? Now, I have to say that each and every perpetrator is different. They all prey on children for different reasons, which is why this book is so compelling to me. More than a dozen perpetrators shared their humiliating stories about their abuse of children to help protect other children. It was so compelling, the idea that all of these people decided to be open and honest about something that I can imagine is very humiliating and shameful to them. But they're doing it in the honor of protecting other children. And so I really appreciate that. Now, the first paragraph of the introduction reads, oops, sorry about that. My husband ordered pizza. The first paragraph of the introduction reads, offenders are not the troll under the bridge or the man in a trench coat in front of a schoolyard with a puppy. We are members of your family. We are people you know and trust. We are people who have access to your child. Now, reading that last sentence, we are people who have access to your child, literally sent chills down my spine. That last sentence is that elusive answer to why do perpetrators abuse? And the simple answer is they abuse because they are able to gain access to their victim. They are able to gain access to your child. That is the root of the problem. We can stop abusers by not giving them access to their victims. The author and other sex offenders that shared their stories were more candid than I expected them to be. And I must say, I do have a better insight into the mind of a sex offender now. Now, I just want to make sure that I'm simulcasting everywhere. So let's do this. Let's see here. Get that back on. I got to log in here. Sorry about that, guys. I had to log back into my Facebook. There we go. So hopefully I am now also live on Facebook. Okay. So as I was saying, I really do, after reading this book, feel like I do have better insight into the mind of a sex offender. And, here's what I learned. And I think part of this I already knew, and maybe you did too, but hi, Kim. Thank you for joining us today. I was just saying that I came across this fascinating book that was actually written by a perpetrator on how to protect children from sex abuse. And I found it very compelling because it includes stories from more than a dozen sex offenders on their acts and the grooming techniques that they used to gain access to their victims. So here's what I learned. Sex offenders really do emerge from every type of family, every socioeconomic level, every race, every culture, and every religion. They have sex offenders. And now I want to read from the book tonight because that is really the only way to truly convey how powerful the stories are here, is if you read them for yourself or hear them for yourself. So I am going to start with clinical, the mind of the offender. The therapist told us we may never know the reasons. Sex offending is attributed to a series of psychological disorders rooted in trauma. Although the memories of our trauma are repressed, the emotions of those events torment us. We ask ourselves, why do I feel this awful emptiness? Why am I so angry, depressed, anxious, and miserable? Why am I attracted to children? What will bring me relief and make me happy? We try therapy, medication, we move, buy a home, change jobs, change wives, drink, drug, have multiple sex partners, and make all efforts to fix the blame somewhere or on someone and to find relief. We are more comfortable with children than adults. We feel at home with them. We believe they understand us, and we are attracted to them. In the company of children, we find an oasis of well-being and arousal. We wrongly believe the antidote to our misery can come from children and sex with children. Seeking children is an unconscious reenactment of our own unhealed abuse and a cry for help. We believe children can meet our emotional needs and that children want sex with us. Patrick Carnes, a pioneer in the field of sex addiction, lists 4 basic core beliefs held by pedophiles and sex addicts. The first, I am basically a bad, unworthy person. 2, no one would love me as I am. 3, my needs are never going to be met if I depend on others. And 4, sex is my most important need. Sex is our most important need is not understated. My prison therapist, Mr. W., commented that in our offending cycle, we were like Wolfman, chained to a concrete wall in a locked dungeon. When the moon came out, we broke our chains and went through the wall after a victim. Why a child and not an adult? Clinicians claim we have not emotionally progressed from the age we were traumatized. We self-identify as a child in an adult body and are adjusting poorly. In our state of delusion, we see the child as an equal and non-threatening. Children become our friends. They are safe, and we can trust them. Ultimately, we have power and control over a child, and as our therapist told us, we may never know the reasons. In the company of children, we no longer struggle to pass as an adult or fit into an adult world, or to carry on adult conversations and interact. With children, we can retreat into the carefree world of irresponsibility and immaturity, satisfying our needs without regard for others. We feel accepted, loved, admired, and approved. We feel safe and in control. In acting out at a child sexually, we find relief from our torment in a flood of euphoria and justify our actions with various claims of entitlement and fantasies of love. We assuage any guilt with a number of excuses, from promising to ourselves that we will never do it again, that the child liked it, that we were gentle and loving, or we were teaching her a lesson. Or we blame the victim, our work, our spouse, our mother, the world at large. We reek of entitlement, selfishness, and do not take responsibility. Our comfort and relief are short-lived. The unpleasant emotions and urges return, and once again, in desperation, we resort to the maladaptive coping response of seeking a child. These cycles or patterns, known as repetition compulsion or reenactment, are also found in acts of domestic violence and other abusive situations. To understand the adult, examine his childhood. Despite our distorted beliefs and traumatic past, our elaborate justifications and excuses, we know that molesting children is wrong. When an offender fails to get adequate help and makes the choice to sexually abuse a child, that offender is fully responsible for his behavior and the consequences. Once caught, We feel the bite of the legal system and all of our losses. Everything we have built is gone. Our loved ones, our profession, our freedom, our reputation, and our friends. We also face the devastation we have done to our victim and families. Now we feel the consequences. Eventually, we take full responsibility for what we have done and recognize that our justifications were falsehoods. A child cannot be responsible for the sick actions of an adult. A child is merely an object upon which the sick mind of the offender obsesses and projects his delusions. A woman I worked with in a drug treatment program told me her father beat her with coat hangers, then raped her at the age of 12 because she looked like his deceased wife. Regardless of the dynamics between the abuser and the victim, regardless of the twisted sense of love or entitlement, it has nothing to do with the victim herself. She or he simply happens to be there. The shrouding of sexual abuse in secrecy and its relegation to the deepest realms of taboo have created a covenant of denial, deliberate ignorance, and the unintended but disastrous consequence of allowing child molesting to flower and spread, leaving ravaged children strewn about like broken toys from one coast to the other. Wow. Right? That last paragraph, woo! The consequence of allowing child molesting to flower and spread, leaving ravaged children strewn about like broken toys from one coast to the other. That is the truest statement I have ever read, ever. And so, as I continued reading, all I can do is continue. That's all. In the How Sex Offenders Operate chapter, it starts with an encouragement to parents. The one thing I want to encourage parents to do above all is trust your feelings and intuition. If something does not feel right, do not discount that feeling. When all signs of pedophilia are absent, everything appears safe, and you will still feel a dread, a discomfort, and distrust. Go with it. Many parents, especially mothers, after the fact, reported that they knew something was wrong, but they did not know what. These mothers discounted their instincts because they had no proof and did not want to seem hysterical or socially awkward. Do not allow your actions to be dictated by politeness or social mores. Protecting your child is more important than saving face. You are not dealing with normal. Now, I couldn't have said that better myself. So I find that statement to be quite profound. It accurately takes the onus off the child and onto the parent where it belongs. I fully believe in empowering our children to say no and run away if they ever feel uncomfortable, but not every child can do that. Let's be realistic. There are children with disabilities who can't speak or who can't move and can't run for help. We can't leave it up to our children to protect themselves. It's our job as parents to keep them safe, point blank, period. Now, I want to read some of the stories to you. While you listen, see if you can identify the grooming behaviors of the perpetrator. We will discuss at the end of each story. In the meantime, go ahead and request to come on stage if you'd like to be part of the conversation, or start a conversation in the comments section. But let's get the conversation going. So the first story that I'm going to read is entitled Mr. Sumner's. A wood sign, whose faded letters are all but illegible, leans to the side of a rutted gravel driveway, offering shade to a few stray dogs. Al's Trailer Court, by the Week, is located on the edge of town, not far from a welding shop and salvage yard. Aluminum cans and McDonald's wrappers are scattered among the rows of trailers. Several cats laze on the stoop of a dilapidated building that serves as the laundry room. This is home to a population of kids with single moms on various forms of government support. Today, school is out. Inside a single wide trailer, the faded brown one in the third row, next to the truck with the rear axle on blocks, Sumner's, a new tenant, hunkers his 6-foot, 280-pound frame into a chair, inching open the nicotine-stained shade. He peeks out the window at the kids playing along his row, patiently waiting for a child he likes. A boy around 9 years old appears and joins in, circling on his bike. Sumner's, unkempt and shabbily attired, leaves his trailer and casually walks to his car and lifts the hood, drawing the attention of the children. The boy, led by Sumner's open and inviting face, bicycles over to watch. Sumner's casually asks the child where he lives. The child points out the white and gray one with the awning and flower box. He volunteers where he goes to school, what grade he is in. Mrs. Henry is his teacher, and he lives with his mom and 2 brothers. He never hears from his dad. He asks Sumner's what he is doing to his car. Sumner's plays it off as nothing and said he is going in to get a soda. As an afterthought, he invites the child into his trailer for a Coke. Once inside, the child notices the array of video games, PlayStations, computer, and a big screen television. He wants to play. Sumner's hands him a soda and assures him, "I don't mind if you play. Maybe we could take turns." But first, he has to fix his car and promises the child when he returns from the market, he will bring him a treat. They leave the trailer, sodas in hand, and walk to the car where Sumner's makes a few adjustments and drives off. He returns to find a bicycle leaning against his trailer and the boy on his steps. Waving and smiling, Sumner's displays the grocery bag. The child holds the door open and follows him in anticipation. Sumner's gives the boy ice cream and pizza and insists he take some home. He suggests the boy come back after supper, but only after he asks his mom. Polite, considerate, and generous, Mr. Sumner's becomes a hero to the child's mother. "Mom," the child asks, "can I go play at Mr. Sumner's?" Receiving pizza from him, and now her son wants to go play, Mom feels obligated to this kind stranger, and if nothing else, will meet him out of curiosity, if not outright gratitude. Why would she tell this man if he goes near her child, she would call the police? She believes her child is annoying him. She cannot break her child's heart. "God bless Mr. Sumner's," she sighs. "He is the first man who has shown her son any affection or attention in years. Lord knows the child's father, wherever he is, doesn't even call. She hasn't seen her child so happy, so excited in a long time. What a good-hearted man, deserving better, just going along in life, kind of a big, silly kid himself." This big, silly kid is, in fact, an emotionally stunted, full-blown offender. Happy-go-lucky Sumner's has no regard for others. He cares only about himself and his own gratification. The toys, videos, games, and all are lures. The trap is set. Sumner's trailer soon fills with neighborhood kids, ages 8 to 12, playing video games, munching chips, and drinking sodas. The final step in Sumner's grooming is collusion. Mr. Sumner's must get them into a situation to compromise them into silence. He passes out cigarettes with the pizza. And what's pizza without beer? How did porn get into my video player? Have some magazines to go along with that. Soon, Sumner's is molesting the boys. The threat implied, "If you tell on me, you tell on yourself." The kids fear their parents will be furious and punish them. Having been sexual, for which they blame themselves, further compounds their terror and guilt. The parents' voices in their heads are screaming, "I don't care if that man gave you a beer and pornography. You knew better. It is your fault. You let him do those things to you." They retreat into silent submission. Prepubescent and pubescent boys are not mature enough to be responsible or capable of outwitting an adult. What they need is reassurance and love, not punishment. A victim of sexual abuse is not responsible for his abuse any more than a woman who is raped is at fault for her assault. Over time, kids became sullen, angry, and stopped going to Mr. Sumner's trailer. When moms began to question Sumner's, he relocated overnight to another trailer park, peering through his window, looking for a child he likes. Mr. Sumner's is now peering through prison bars looking at 20 years. Oh my gosh, there are so many examples, so many examples in there of the grooming techniques. Wow. And he lists, what I love about this book is he literally lists them out like bullet points. So, it's easily understandable. Sumner's had no adult friends or adult interests. This is the foremost indicator of pedophilia. His home became a haven for children. He had the same toys or better than the kids on the block. That's one way that they gained the kids' interest. Oh, he has this video game that I don't have. I want to go play the video game. He barely held down a job and ditched work to be with children. Sumner's poor hygiene and unkempt appearance are indicators of low self-esteem, irresponsibility, and low functioning. This sometimes appeals to codependent women who feel sorry for him, thinking all the poor man needs is a bath and a haircut, someone to look after him. But as this story demonstrates, that's not always the case. And so let's continue on to the next story. This story is about Saul. Saul stood on the front porch of his upscale Minnesota home, drinking cappuccino from a Donald Duck cup and smoking a cigarette, admiring the view. Beautiful day already, he thought. He looked toward his neighbor's home and glanced at his watch, wondering where Emily was. He planned to invite her over to look at his Mickey Mouse belt buckle. She had been over before, met his wife, and even had lunch. He saw nothing wrong with a 45-year-old man having an 11-year-old girl as a friend. He got more pleasure being with her than in the company of adults, or his wife of 10 years. Once Emily was over, he would casually mention he had a project for her and a gift. She would follow him to the basement, where it was private, in a place where he and Emily, two good friends, could share. Today, he planned to give her a Mickey Mouse t-shirt to match his belt buckle. He would give it to her in the basement where he could help her try it on. The project was going along Emily's interest in the solar system. Saul, with a degree in engineering, had rigged up a telescope and was working on a lens he found at a garage sale. This would allow him to be near her. Who would question a good neighbor helping a friend with her science project? Suspicious, Sal's wife came downstairs and discovered Emily about to try on her t-shirt. She sent Emily home, and under threat of police intervention, Saul went to a treatment center. This was not his first victim. Saul brought his Donald Duck cup to the first meeting at the treatment center. Wearing the Mickey Mouse belt, the group confronted him on these lures, and after months of denial, he tossed them both out. His mask was off. He was known. Saul was sent home with a referral to a therapist and the knowledge he was facing 20 years in prison if he repeated this abuse. So let's talk about it. Saul had a history of molesting children. And 45-year-old men usually don't use Disney products as their everyday wear, and utilities. And 45-year-old men do not have 11-year-old friends. Saul spent an excessive amount of time and attention on Emily. She was a neighbor, not his daughter. He took a child to a basement by himself, with or without his history, is questionable. Never allow anyone to be alone with your child. His wife failing to report him or demand he get help the first time was enabling him. So all of these things, imagine all of these victims of child sexual abuse And all of the times that the parents said, oh, he was just drinking, or he was, he didn't mean it. He's just an old man. That's all ways of enabling abuse. And we have got to stop doing that. Now, the next story is very short, but trust me when I say there's enough information to prove the point here. Let's see. Reggie. This is entitled Reggie. Last call was a half hour ago. Reggie's girlfriend had left with some guy. It was 2:30 a.m. The bar was closing, and Reggie, penniless, jobless, drunk, furious, and newly homeless, needed a ride and a place to stay. Fred and Sue, acquaintances, felt sorry for him and took him to their home. Once there, Reggie settled into a chair, smoking pot, watching their 13-year-old daughter shoot pool in a t-shirt and panties. After Fred and Sue went to bed, Reggie dragged the girl down the hall into her bedroom where he beat and raped her. Now, the first thing that I have to say here is the rape of this child could have been prevented, but I need to say that this was not the child's fault because the child was playing pool wearing underwear in front of a man. It's plain and simple. The sad thing is that Reggie showed no signs of pedophilia, but no one's going to show a sign of pedophilia if you don't know them. Every stranger puts up their best face the first time they meet you. That first impression is everything. But you don't know if you don't know them. And so the fact that he showed no signs of pedophilia really means nothing to me in this story because it just doesn't. My biggest takeaway from that story is you just don't leave your children with someone you don't know. And if you have a company over, it is not okay for your daughter to be in her panties walking around. It's up to the parent to tell the child, go get dressed so you're not walking around that way. But again, I have to say this is not the victim's fault because she was wearing panties. I just need to put that out there. Now, the next story here is another shorter one. Oh, I got to log back in. There we go. The next story truly surprised me, and I wonder if you'll feel the same way after you hear it. Let's read the story about Eddie. Sparse, graying hair randomly sprouts around his liver-spotted pate. Eddie, nearly 80, is wearing a faded blue shirt and loose-fitting jeans. Slightly slumped, he shuffles ever so slightly as he walks towards the prison kitchen for his second cup of coffee. A faint trail of Bengay and Old Spice follow. If you were to meet him at a lunch counter or were seated next to him on an airplane, he would look at you through blue, roomy eyes resting behind wireframe glasses and offer you a stick of gum or a cup of coffee. He is a decent sort, personable, the kind of man whose company you might enjoy, perhaps finding him a bit dull and uninterested in self-exploration. He may confide in you that his penis was removed due to cancer. You may think he would be the safest person in the world to watch children. Well, Eddie was born in the 1920s to a family of professionals he described as filled with wealth and status, but devoid of love and feelings. Around the age of 14, Eddie met a woman in her 20s who led him to his first sexual encounter. The quote-unquote affair, as he thought of it, lasted about 6 months. It was the first time anyone had paid him any attention. Mistaking her interest as affection and care, he wrongly concluded that sex was love, euphoria the goal. Thus began the compulsive search for sex and the road to future molestation of his daughters and granddaughter. By his middle teens, he had grown into an athletic, handsome, well-groomed, and personable young man. His many girlfriends satisfied what was by then a sexual addiction. Upon graduating high school, Eddie courted Beth, a Catholic school girl with aspirations of joining a convent. Following a pleasant but uneventful courtship, they married in the 1940s. Beth caught Eddie in a number of affairs. When she found him on their boat with the brunette from next door, she hurled insults and accusations and shouted an ultimatum. "You have to make a choice which way to go." The subject was never again broached, and life went on as if nothing had occurred. Eddie continued his sexual trysts, taking greater care. In his own words, sex with my wife was regular and dull, but even during all my affairs, I still had time for her. The marriage was perfunctory. Eddie did not buy Beth gifts, nor did he bring her flowers. After 50 years of marriage, he did not know her goals, likes and dislikes, interests or hobbies. It never crossed his mind. When his penis became sore and irritated, the physician diagnosed cancer and performed a penectomy. I think that's how you pronounce it, penectomy, removing the penis. Post-surgery, the doctor sent Eddie home. Eddie pleased his wife as best he could and even received some mild gratification at first. In a short time, that dwindled, and all sexual responses and sexual pleasure were lost. This subject, too, was never broached, and life went on as if nothing had occurred. Following his penectomy, Eddie became interested in his developing 13-year-old daughter based solely on curiosity. Though he received no sexual pleasure, he did feel a thrill in the idea and act of fondling her. It was exciting, euphoric. The same occurred with his youngest daughter, and many years later, his granddaughter. Minimizing the consequences of his behavior, Eddie remarked that his oldest daughter shrugged it off, and the younger one just avoided him. Eddie concluded that because his daughters never told, it did not bother them. They never told because they were raised in a home where subjects were never broached and nothing was done. There was no one to tell who would do them any good. The signs were there. Both girls avoided him, locked themselves in their bedrooms, stayed away from home, and became quiet and sullen. They overdressed in layers of clothes, became belligerent, began smoking, and showed signs of promiscuity, and a drastic change in weight. Their grades dropped and their schoolwork suffered. This, too, was never broached, and life went on as if nothing had occurred. 25 years later, Eddie had bypass surgery on 3 arteries to his heart. His doting 14-year-old granddaughter decided to take care of him. She visited daily while Grandma Beth was away at work. It all seemed so innocent. He groomed her on his riding mower where, outdoors, in front of everyone, he sat her on his lap, and as they mowed, he rubbed against her. On his boat, he leaned over her, ostensibly teaching her to steer and maneuver. This excited him enormously. It was thrilling. It was euphoric. Eddie's fantasy life ran wild. Eddie began sharing his thoughts and feelings with his granddaughter as though they were emotional equals. He made her his confidant. Entranced by her beauty, he believed he had a romantic relationship with her. They were in love. He proceeded to force himself on her. When asked what gratification he received without a penis, Eddie described being sexual with his granddaughter as similar to experiencing the awe of seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time, or viewing a masterpiece of art. Being sexual with my granddaughter gave me a sense of awe, infatuation, intoxication, being loved and cared for. A bit like first time makes everything better. It was a mental and emotional opiate. He considered the abuse of his granddaughter as consensual. Never mind the fact that she was his granddaughter, that she was a minor, or that he initiated all the instances of abuse, or that it was absolutely illegal. The feeling of love, intimacy, and euphoria was his goal. Within a few months, granddaughter told her girlfriend of her special moments with Grandpa. The girlfriend reported this to her mother. The court sentenced Eddie to prison for 15 years. Beth visits him regularly. The subject is not broached, and life goes on as if nothing had occurred. Understandably, it is offensive to cast suspicion on a grandfather's outwardly innocent-appearing interaction with his granddaughter. It is insulting and none of our business. Yet, we see the behavior as inappropriate and sense something is wrong. Without corroboration or some evidence, proof, what can be done? This is the precise place where offenders hide and thrive. Molesting without reproach in the fortresses of unaccountability, surrounded by a pool of silence, denial, and unasked questions. The realm of the three monkeys. And I'm going to read that story to you a little bit later. Ooh. So, we know Eddie was a sex addict and he had no respect for women. Never assume that a man won't offend simply because he can't have sex. I mean, this story proves that sex isn't always the driving factor for abusers. Most of the time, it's simple control. They can control these people in these situations. Eddie shared his thoughts and feelings with his granddaughters as if they were emotional equals. Anybody who's been around two people that, if you've seen, you're like, oh, they seem like they're a little bit too close for comfort. You know what to look for. I mean, if you ever see that in your family, you have to do something about it, because in this case, the family members knew about his abuse and they did nothing about it. And I'm saddened that as of this story, Beth was still visiting her grandfather in prison after he did what he did to her. And that shows you that survivors can't really heal without the support of everyone around them. If no one around them felt that it was important for them to get help, then why would they feel like it's important for them to get help? Why would they think that it was important what happened to them if nobody else saw that or said anything? So, just some things to think about. Now, the next story may be a bit complex with all the names and everything, but I think it really demonstrates generational abuse. And as we know, that is such a huge issue within the prevention of child sexual abuse. It's breaking that cycle for our children so we don't repeat what our parents repeated. So the next story is called Uncle Al. Just going to take a sip of water real quick. Oh, hi, Judy. I didn't see you. Thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you guys are getting a conversation going in the comments. Any thoughts or anything, go ahead and put them in the comments. So, Uncle Al. David L. Emerson Jr. was born in Ohio to an alcoholic, a Bible-toting, rifle-carrying Baptist preacher, a mean-spirited man, and his equally hateful wife. The couple subjected David and his sister to violent and cruel abuses. Both children became alcoholics by the age of 12. David ran away to Tennessee. His sister became pregnant, ran off, and married at 14. There lived in Tennessee a railroad family whose daughter Gail lived a happy, sheltered childhood. She took her first and last drink of moonshine on a dare at her high school graduation. After graduating, Gail became a full-time clerk at the general store. David came in one day and struck up a conversation with Gail. He returned the following day, and she accepted his offer to go on a date. Following a rapid courtship, David and Gail married. Their first child, Alan, was born a year later in 1962. Alan was a skinny, gawky little boy. His father, David, in keeping the Emerson family tradition, told Alan he was a failure, a shame, and a disgrace to the family. Then he beat him. Alan retreated to his closet with his toys and closed the door, terrified and helpless. A daughter was born. They named her Morgan. As she grew older, David beat her too. David often forced Alan to watch him beat Morgan. Despite Alan's tears, pleas, and protests, he could not protect her. Gail, unexposed to and ill-equipped for violence, did her best by stepping in between and taking the blows intended for her children. She finally got David to stop hitting the children under the threat of a shotgun. Not to be dissuaded, David waited until Gail left the house or he sent her on an errand. Once alone, he beat the children, threatening to kill their mother should they tell. David explained away their sudden bruises, saying, "Kids fall, bump into things." When Alan was 9, David sent Gail on an errand, then went into his son's bedroom and raped him. If Alan told, David threatened he would rape Morgan and kill his mother. Alan poisoned his dad's entire aquarium, played with matches, started fires, destroyed objects, and smashed things. 2 years later, Gail divorced David. The rape, beatings, and sadistic torment ended, but not the trauma. Alan found comfort with his friend Corey. While playing around some boards near the back of his friend's house, Alan and Corey spotted something mysterious looking. Curious, they peered under a board, finding Corey's dad's stash of Jack Daniels. The curious 11-year-old sampled the goods with impunity. Corey's dad could not say anything without incriminating himself. By age 13, Alan was an alcoholic and a pothead. At 14, he took a fancy to Corey's 17-year-old sister and seduced her. Pot, whiskey, and sex became Alan's formula for life. In rare moments of sobriety, Alan ran high school track, played tennis, and maintained passable grades. Despite his sporadic success, sex took over and became all-consuming. Natalie, age 19, lived next door to Alan. She was a demanding and dominant female, equally driven sexually. They married, the basis of which was not having to find a place to have sex anymore. The couple spent time renting XXX movies and being unfaithful to one another. Alan lost 7 jobs because he came to work drunk or drank at work. Natalie told him he was a good-for-nothing drunk son of a bitch. Alan responded in kind, often going into drunken rages. His salvation came from his 2 daughters, ages 5 and 1, who loved his drunk and unemployed self unconditionally. Alan withdrew into the world of his children, where he played games with them and retreated into the closet. Natalie reached the point of no return and filed for divorce, sending Alan into a drunken spree of promiscuity and homelessness. Meanwhile, Alan's sister Morgan had divorced her husband and settled into a modest apartment with her 8-year-old daughter, Sandy. When a cheap single came vacant in her building, she contacted Alan, who took occupancy. Alan's mom, Gail, paid his utilities and phone, insisting he could not get a job without one. Alan found part-time work maintaining a guy's yard and home, the income covering his rent and liquor. He ate free at Morgan's. When Alan and his niece Sandy met, they immediately bonded. He became a replacement for her absent father, and she replaced his daughters. Alan, at the age of 29, had found an 8-year-old girl in whom he could take refuge. Alan described the relationship with his niece. "I became her advocate and protector. She advocated for me when I was drunk. We looked out for each other. We had a bond of trust, loyalty. We defended one another. He groomed her by letting her do anything that her mother forbade. This strengthened our bond. We agreed not to tell on one another. It was our secret. It was a trap. If you tell on me, I'll tell on you." Having the run of Alan's apartment, unrestricted and encouraged, Sandy was involved in decisions and secrets beyond her years. By age 10, Sandy was lured into the role of lady of the house, empowered with a false sense of authority, confidence, daring, and maturity, a position that she knew she was incapable of sustaining or commanding. This child was balancing on a tightrope without a net. Alan raped her. Incapable of thinking any wrongdoing by her Uncle Al and traumatized by the event, Sandy was repeatedly raped for a month before telling her best friend, who told her mom, who called the police. What these adults suffered as children are unconscionable. I understand the road they traveled into their own mental aberrations. Nonetheless, there is no excuse for abuse. For ease of reading, Dave and Gail, Al and Natalie, and Al and Morgan are discussed separately. So the first person here in this cycle is Dave, and he showed no signs of pedophilia. His violence and alcoholism were enough cause to separate him from the children. Child molesting is not a far reach for someone who is mentally ill, drunk, with poor boundaries, or someone who feels the need to exert great control. So now Al and Natalie. Al retreating into childhood with his children is not normal. There was emotional congruence. His emotional level was the same as the children's. Alarms should be ringing. Children, alcohol, drugs, violence, and sex addiction do not mix. For Alan Morgan. Alan had no adult friends or adult interests, a key indicator of pedophilia. There was emotional congruence with a child. Morgan knew that marijuana, whiskey, and sex were her brother's formula for life. She also knew he was violent, erratic, and irresponsible, and his father had physically and sexually abused him. He was a poor choice for a babysitter. Healthy adults do not enter into collusion or conspiracies with 8-year-olds, especially not against their mom, nor do they consider an 8-year-old to be looking out for him or that we looked out for each other. A healthy adult looks out for the well-being of an 8-year-old. He seeks to protect and keep her safe and encourages her appropriate behavior. Adults do not have secrets with children. One trick in manipulating a child is to treat her much older than she actually is. He attempts to raise her level of maturity so she is a big girl in her eyes. This pushes her into behaviors and responsibilities far beyond her comprehension or capacity. It serves the dual purpose of playing into the offender's sick fantasies and in silencing the child by implied wrongdoing on the child's part. The child is confused. She does not understand the offender caused the transgression and that she is an innocent victim. Oh. I know that was a lot. I know that was a lot, but in that one story, there were so many examples of grooming and showing how these cycles just continue and continue and continue until somebody puts a stop to it. Somebody has to. Now, the next chapter is on religiosity. It's very, very insightful. And so I wanted to include it here because I think it includes a very important distinction between the religious and religious. So we start. The word religios is defined and used here as excessive, conspicuous, affected religious zeal, insincere, pretentious, or false spiritual fervor, not to be confused with the word religious, meaning observant, devout, following a particular religion or faith. So I want to make sure everyone remembers that as we're talking about this. Religion is not in question. Offenders come from all walks of life and every faith imaginable. Questioned and put under a bright light are those clerics, practitioners, congregants, and members who wear a mask of holiness behind which they sexually abuse children. The most sincerely devout, pious, and holy struggle with the same human frailties as everyone else. They are capable of and do cross the line into appalling behavior. Religious leaders teach, counsel, uplift, and move us with their skills of oration, persuasion, and knowledge of their faith. That is their job. Knowledge of spiritual principles and living those principles are entirely separate matters. Offenders in untreated stages of their disorder may appear as ideal congregants. Some become ministers, rabbis, and gurus and wear the cloth of divine authority behind which they molest children. They meet any suspicion cast in their direction with feigned shock, indignation, and verbal barrages of carefully rehearsed and memorized scripture. People seem to fear more than respect the super pious and see them as so untouchable that surely God is with them. They also fear tongue lashing from them as they attack with scripture and condemnation. In the highly distorted world and magical thinking of the religious sex offender, he holds up his extraordinary efforts as a bargaining chip. God will trade off sexually abusing children for good works, dedication, and efforts to repent. An offender in recovery contributed this. Being a former zealot, molester myself, most of us don't blame God. Most of us feel intensely that we are dreadfully sinful and cling to the principle that God will forgive us any sin. To us, it becomes a self-involved dance between God and us. I sin, I repent, I backslide. I sin, I repent, I backslide. God always forgives. God is the get out of hell free card. It gives us license to sin ever greater because we can be perpetually forgiven. The chink in that armor is that the religious molester is not only sinning against God and morality, but against an innocent child. This was my pitfall, and the reason religion, specifically Christianity, is so dangerous for me. The focus of the offender becomes his own struggle for redemption, instead of the devastating harm he's wreaking in the lives of those he professes to love. Authentic spirituality is an essential, core foundation of recovery. The importance cannot be overstated. This is a genuine commitment to living a decent, wholesome life based on godly principles and is not to be confused with religiosity. I'm so glad that he talked about that because there are so many people that do hide behind that, and I know many of us have experienced that. And now I just want to read a story or two related to this type of abuser. And these stories are a little bit shorter, so not to worry there. And we might go over a little tonight, so hopefully you can stick around. So the first one is Uncle Ezekiel. Uncle Ezekiel lay naked on the couch, quoting scriptures while masturbating in front of his two nieces. He later raped both girls. The older niece shared, because he had committed the scriptures to memory, everyone thought him a holy man. Fearful that God would punish them for telling on such a religious man, they also feared fellow church members would disbelieve and scorn them, shaming them for saying bad things and having evil thoughts. Ever fearful of hell, where they would surely go for telling and being witness to what their uncle did, the two girls refused to report this and continued to be raped in tearful silence by Uncle Ezekiel. We've got to be clear here. Masturbating in front of children is a sex offense and illegal. Reciting holy scriptures while doing so is psychotic. I really do like that line there, that sentence, because it's true. And here's the thing, Uncle Ezekiel has done this before. This was nothing new. The family knew that he was capable of this. It's inconceivable and impossible that the girl's parents, authorities, and other adults failed to know the imminent danger that the kids were in. It's just, now that we've heard a few stories, I want to, shift to recovery and hope. Actually, you know what? I have one more story to share, and then we'll move to recovery and hope. This is Rabbi Shulman. Rabbi and Estelle Shulman were in their 60s. After 43 years of marriage, they managed to save over $1 million in retirement. The couple resided in a beautiful home in a fancy neighborhood, and he was the rabbi in a prestigious temple. Life was good. When Rabbi was not orating and preaching from the bema before his congregation, he slouched behind his desk, masturbating to preteen girls seated before him, reading aloud in Hebrew. Rabbi turned this Hebrew lessons and considered his activity a harmless, victimless act. He had numerous affairs with adult female congregants, slips he called them, attributing this as a weakness. He observed the Jewish holidays and officiated at services, weddings, and bar and bat mitzvahs. He also counseled. When he gave counsel to those seeking I read this before, rabbinical direction, yeah, that's right, he would encourage them not to make things a big deal. Always wearing a smile, Rabbi presented as a warm, sympathetic, kind, compassionate, and forgiving man, a leader, overcommitted with a long line of people dependent upon his wisdom and a longer line of women. The rabbi's loyal wife stood by him, understanding his demanding hours, absence, and forgiving his indiscretions. He vowed to stop. When she caught him for the final time with another woman, she filed for divorce. Several women in his congregation filed complaints. I cannot pronounce this word to save my life. The rabbinical, I know that's not pronounced correctly. The rabbinate, okay, we're going to move on from that word. The board, thank you. The board revoked his license and the synagogue fired him for adulterous relations with his congregants. Rabbi finagled his way into a position with a small congregation who failed to check his credentials. He now sponsors other sex offenders in 12-step programs and stands at the bema with a big smile, teaching Torah and giving Hebrew lessons. At least he was fired. His wife knew about these affairs, and she forgave him. To addicts, forgiveness is license to continue, especially when there are no consequences. He was a womanizer, a sex addict. And aside from tutoring children in Hebrew, an opportune part of his duties, he neither sought out children nor showed any signs of being a pedophile. The rabbi's claim that intention is good enough conflicts with Torah. In the book of Numbers, God did not suggest the Jews bring a few rams, some lambs, a handful, whatever you got laying around. The God of the Jews is precise. There are 613 commandments, none of which say, do the best you can. Try, whatever. Discounting and minimizing irresponsible behaviors of others is a form of encouragement and complicity. So now I want to shift to recovery and hope. Is it possible for sex offenders to recover? Here's what MBC has to say about it. We offend because we want to. That is the bottom line of our behavior. No one wants to say those things, those words. They shame us to the core of our being and utterly disgrace us. They strip us of all pretense, all excuses, all sense of normal. The mask of innocence is removed from our face, and we are left totally exposed, humiliated and horrified of who we have become and what we have done. Until we admit it, until we stand in it and grab hold of it with both hands, own it outright, we are in denial. As a member of a family, be it son, dad, husband, or brother, some of us are fortunate to reunite or reconcile with them, as in my case, and the result can be a great healing for everyone. My process of recovery included intensive cognitive, behavioral, confrontational, and aversion therapy in a group of offenders under the guidance of a specially trained therapist over a 5-year period. The group was composed of 15 to 18 men whose convictions ranged from child offenses to adult rape. We met daily for 2 to 3 hours at a time, 5 days a week. Distortions and denials were crushed under the barrage of confrontational challenges where delusions, pretense, violence, hate, selfishness, nice guy, and bullies had their masks torn off. At times, violence broke out. Then there was the interaction on the unit, on the rec yard, the chow hall, as well as at work and our leisure time. Our behaviors and attitudes surfaced fast. Everything was open for challenge at any moment by any group member. The distortions I held echoed many of the thoughts previously presented. It takes most of us a year or longer to come out of our denial, to admit the truth about what we did and face ourselves. It took well over a year before I admitted to myself and the group that what I did to a child was not loving, it was not gentle, it was not consensual. It was an act of force and violence against a child. That children do not want sex, especially with adults. That I was not a nice guy. That my thinking was distorted, twisted, and sick. I was selfish. I sought immediate gratification. I was cunning and manipulative. I was dishonest with myself and others. I made excuses and justified my sick behavior, and of utmost importance, I caused severe harm to an innocent child. Before I completed the program, I went through aversion therapy and prepared a typed 32-page relapse prevention plan, which I read aloud to the group, detailing every act and thought I had prior to recovery. I challenged my behaviors and thoughts, took full and complete responsibility for my actions, and showed empathy for my victim in an unsent letter. Available to me was an Adults Molested as Children group. The staff allowed me to attend once I was on my way to recovery. I spent a year in AMAC understanding and resolving my own abuse as a child. My recovery comes first and above all else. Certain things just are not negotiable. I avoid being with children. I avoid anything or anyone who promotes or supports child sex or in any way abuses a child. I surround myself with positive people and those who are on what I consider a healthy life path. I do not tolerate abuse or negative people. I eliminate drama, active substance abusers, and people who refuse help. I do not argue. I will share my thoughts without a need to defend or justify them. I will listen to others with an open mind. I offset all negative toxic thoughts with positive affirmations or redirect them to healthy thoughts. I no longer obsess, blame, ruminate, harbor resentments, or go into rages. Compassion, humility, and gratitude, which I attribute to my spirituality, have replaced much of my entitlement and selfishness. Without a spiritual foundation, I could never have gotten through this. My support group knows everything about me, as do my children, my ex-wife, and my closest friends. I feel good about myself for having reached a point of sanity, safety, and sobriety. As part of my ongoing recovery, I see a counselor when needed and incorporate spirituality, honesty, and truthfulness as a way of life. I take responsibility for my behavior, and when I am wrong, I am quick to admit it. My recovery is not unique. New methods of treatment are proving effective, and recent studies confirm that we have the lowest rate of reoffending of any crime. Once sex offenders have been caught, they have the lowest rate of repeating a sex crime. The Tennessean reported in Sex Crime Offenders Tend Not to Repeat that individuals convicted of sex crimes are less likely to reoffend than other types of felonies. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation study of 2001, along with two other studies in the 1990s, showed the same results. Sex offenders have always been in the lowest risk category, according to Tim Dempsey, Chief Executive Officer of Chattanooga Endeavors. The Department of Justice findings show that 94.7% of those released within a 3-year period were not arrested for another sex crime. For those so interested, current studies are available in this book in the back. Older studies have misleadingly and erroneously included non-sex offenses by sex offenders who committed a condition of probation or parole, or who committed a non-sex crime. Violation of the registry rules, such as being in a park, not registering, and failure to report a change of vehicle or a new address within 48 hours are causes for arrest. So keep in mind, treatment options are different for a non-offender with urges toward children. For non-offenders, a residential treatment program which specializes in this can be helpful. At one time, there were a number of groups available, and over time, they seem to have vanished. As mentioned earlier, and it is most unfortunate, I know of no other program outside of prison that effectively treats offenders. Now, that really surprises me, but it's also alarming at the same time. You know, I have to say, before I go, it's important to point out that not every victim of child sexual abuse goes on to abuse children as adults. As a matter of fact, most do not. And it's also important to point out that there are many alcoholics, drug addicts, narcissists, womanizers, sex addicts, and adult Disney fans that do not sexually abuse children. There are many so-called loners in this world that are not child predators. MDC reminds us that the review of these traits and characteristics cannot be applied out of context. Someone may isolate or appear antisocial and not have many outside interests. Many people are content reading, designing software, engineering, inventing, and they just keep to themselves. This does not mean they have a sexual inclination towards children. So we just have to keep everything in context. If you have a neighbor who you never see anybody over there, but he just leaves everybody alone, he never talks to the kids, he doesn't talk, leave that man alone. He just likes to be by himself. It's these loners who want to surround themselves with children that you have to be concerned about. With all of that said, the bottom line is this: if someone seems suspect, keep them away from your child. And if your child tells you someone made them feel uncomfortable, for the love of everything beautiful, please believe them. As difficult as it may be, don't overreact or explode with emotion. Doing so could make your child feel guilty for upsetting you. They need to see your calmness, which in turn will calm them. They just need to know that you understand the gravity of the situation and take the necessary steps to seek therapy and justice for your child. I believe there are many sex offenders walking free because the family wanted to keep the peace and sweep everything under the rug instead of pressing charges. Fear of upsetting a friend or a family member should never hinder you from fully seeking justice of the law for your child. There is never a justifiable reason for the abuse of a child to occur. And finally, to MBC and the men who shared their humiliating stories in an effort to protect our children, thank you. I know it took a lot of courage for you to do so, but know that you've provided invaluable insight to the path of child sex abuse prevention. And I truly hope that recovery is possible for all of you. But it's reassuring to know that it's possible for most of you. And that I hope more incarcerated abusers take advantage of any recovery programs that are available to them, because that might be the only help that they can get for themselves until our society decides to do something about that. And so we are a bit over time. My apologies. If you have any comments, you can put them in the comment section. I'll be happy to respond to them after the show. But with that, I want to thank you all for joining me. Thank all of you for joining me tonight for episode 18 of Survivor Strong. We will be back in 2 weeks on Wednesday, November 9th at 7 p.m. right here live on Fireside, Facebook, and YouTube. And remember, you got this. We are all in this together. Until next time, everyone. See you next time.